Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now let's begin. The morning light filtered through the windows of Theodore McDowell's home office, illuminating the architectural blueprints scattered across his desk. He sat motionless, staring at a photograph of Schaefer Tower rising against the Chicago skyline. 52 stories of glass and steel that should have been his masterpiece. Instead, it had become his prison. His daughter, Rosalie, appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. At 7 years old, she had his dark eyes and thoughtful expression. "Daddy, are we really going to Grandma and Grandpa's for Christmas?" Theodore turned from his desk, forcing warmth into his smile. "We are, sweetheart. I don't want to go." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Grandma Doris says mean things about my rabbit. She says I'm too old for stuffed animals." He crossed the room and knelt beside her. "Your rabbit is perfect, and so are you. Don't let anyone tell you different." But even as he said the words, Theodore knew he was sending her into a hostile environment. The Schaefer family had been sharpening their knives for months, and Christmas dinner would be their stage. Theodore McDowell hadn't always been surrounded by such toxicity. 5 years ago, he'd been a rising star in structural engineering, fresh off designing an award-winning sustainable housing complex in Portland. He'd met Kathleen Schaefer at a charity gala where he was being honored. She'd been beautiful, charming, and seemingly fascinated by his work. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Dinners at exclusive restaurants, weekend trips to her family's Lake Michigan estate, conversations that lasted until dawn. He'd been so focused on Kathleen that he'd missed the calculating gleam in Calvin Schaefer's eyes when they first shook hands. Calvin ran Schaefer Development Corporation, a real estate empire built over 3 decades. The family's wealth was staggering, their influence extensive. Theodore, raised by a single mother who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through MIT, had been dazzled by their world. The proposal came 6 months after they met. The wedding was a spectacle. 300 guests at the Drake Hotel, coverage in society pages, Doris Schaefer orchestrating every detail while barely concealing her disappointment that her daughter hadn't landed someone from old money. Theodore told himself it didn't matter. He loved Kathleen, and she loved him. Or so he'd thought. The first crack appeared 3 months after the wedding when Calvin offered him a contract. "Design something magnificent for us, Theodore. A signature tower for downtown Chicago. The Schaefer Tower, our legacy and yours." It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Theodore threw himself into the project, creating innovative structural solutions that would make the building both beautiful and sustainable. His design incorporated advanced seismic dampening, renewable energy systems, and public spaces that would revitalize the neighborhood. Kathleen had kissed him when he showed her the renderings. "My brilliant husband," she'd said. "Daddy will be so pleased." But Calvin wasn't pleased with the budget. "These specifications are too expensive, Theodore. We need to be practical." "These aren't luxuries," Theodore had explained, spreading the engineering reports across Calvin's mahogany desk. "The seismic dampeners are essential for a building this height. The foundation requirements aren't negotiable, and the steel specifications ensure structural integrity for 100 years. Calvin had smiled, the same cold smile Theodore had learned to dread. "You design, son. Let us worry about construction." That should have been his first warning. By the time Rosalie was born, Theodore had learned to read the signs. Kathleen had changed after the wedding, becoming distant and critical. She spent more time at her parents' estate than in their home. When Rosalie arrived with colic and sensory sensitivities that required patience and understanding, Kathleen had retreated further. "She's being dramatic," Doris had declared when Rosalie cried at loud noises. "You're coddling her, Theodore. Schaefer children don't act this way." But Rosalie wasn't a Schaefer child, not in the ways that mattered to them. She was sensitive, thoughtful, and gentle. She loved building elaborate structures with blocks, creating intricate patterns, and asking Theodore about how buildings stood up. She was exactly the daughter he'd hoped for, and the granddaughter the Schaefers couldn't understand. The real revelation had come 18 months ago during a routine site inspection of Schaefer Tower. Theodore had arrived unannounced, wanting to check on the foundation work. What he found made his blood run cold. The construction foreman, a nervous man named Miguel Calhoun, had tried to redirect him. "Mr. McDowell, we weren't expecting you today. Maybe you should come back when Mr. Schaefer. I designed this building, Miguel. I go where I need to go." In the foundation pit, Theodore had discovered they were using substandard rebar, thinner gauge than his specifications required, already showing signs of corrosion. The concrete mix was wrong. The seismic dampeners he'd specified hadn't been installed at all. He confronted Calvin that evening. "You're going to kill people. That building won't survive a moderate earthquake, let alone a major one." Calvin had poured himself scotch, utterly unconcerned. "Chicago doesn't get earthquakes, Theodore. You're being paranoid. The New Madrid fault is hundreds of miles away. Look, I appreciate your dedication, but this is business. Your design was brilliant, but impractical. We've made necessary adjustments. The building inspectors have signed off on everything. Because you bribed them." Theodore hadn't meant to say it, but the words escaped. Calvin's expression had turned to ice. "Careful, son. You're making serious accusations. Accusations that could damage your career and your family. Rosalie's such a sweet little girl. It would be a shame if her father's reputation was destroyed over paranoid delusions." The threat had been clear. Theodore had left Calvin's office shaking with rage and fear. That night, he'd started building his case. For 18 months, he'd worked in secret. He'd documented every deviation from his plans, every bribed inspector, every violation. He'd photographed the substandard materials, recorded conversations, and gathered internal Schaefer development emails that Calvin thought were secure. Theodore's background in sustainable engineering had taught him about systems, how they worked, how they failed, and how to map every connection. He discovered worse than he'd imagined. 3 workers had died during construction, incidents officially ruled as accidents. But Theodore's investigation revealed that improper safety measures and code violations had caused 2 of those deaths. The Schaefers had paid off families, buried reports, and continued business as usual. There was more. Money laundering through shell companies. Bribery of city officials extending far beyond building inspectors. Threats and intimidation of competitors. The Schaefers' empire was built on corruption, and Schaefer Tower was their crowning achievement, a 52-story monument to greed that could collapse and kill hundreds. Theodore had contacted the FBI through an attorney friend, feeding them information anonymously. He'd prepared a comprehensive structural report documenting every flaw in Schaefer Tower. He'd compiled a media package with evidence so damning it couldn't be ignored. And he'd waited for the right moment. That moment was coming. He could feel it. "Theodore," Kathleen's voice echoed through the house. "We need to leave in an hour. Are you even ready?" He looked down at Rosalie, whose anxiety was visible in her tense shoulders. "Let's get you dressed in something comfortable, okay? And you can bring your rabbit. Mommy said I can't bring Mr. Hops to Grandma's house." "Mr. Hops is coming," Theodore said firmly. "I'll handle your mother." Kathleen was in their bedroom, fastening pearl earrings, a gift from Doris. She'd grown thinner over the years, more angular. The warmth he'd fallen in love with had been carefully excised, replaced by the polished coldness of Schaefer expectations. "Rosalie wants to bring her stuffed animal," Theodore said. "Absolutely not. Mother's already upset that we're bringing her at all. You know how she gets about children at adult gatherings. Rosalie is their granddaughter. She's difficult, Theodore. She cries at everything. She has those ridiculous sensory issues you encourage. She has anxiety because your family treats her like a burden." Kathleen's eyes flashed. "My family has been extraordinarily generous to you. They gave you the opportunity of a lifetime with Schaefer Tower. They've included you in their world. And this is how you repay them? By being combative and ungrateful." Theodore studied his wife, wondering when he'd lost her, or if he'd ever really had her. "Did your father tell you to marry me, Kathleen?" She went still. "What? The timeline doesn't add up. Calvin approached me about Schaefer Tower 3 months after our wedding, but I've found emails discussing the project from before we even met. He needed an architect with my reputation and my sustainable engineering background. Someone whose name would legitimize the project. Did he tell you to pursue me? You're being paranoid, just like with your ridiculous accusations about the construction." "I have proof, Kathleen." About the construction, about the bribes, about everything. She laughed, but it sounded brittle. Proof? Of what? That my father runs a successful business? That he makes practical decisions instead of idealistic ones? Grow up, Theodore. This is how the world works. People died because of those practical decisions. Accidents happen in construction. It's unfortunate, but they weren't accidents. Theodore kept his voice level controlled. And you know it. You all know it. You just don't care. Kathleen turned back to the mirror, dismissing him. We're leaving in 45 minutes. Try to be presentable. And, Theodore, don't make a scene at dinner. Mother's already in a mood because Aunt Brandy can't make it for Portland. Theodore left without responding. In Rosalie's room, he found his daughter dressed in her favorite green velvet dress, clutching Mr. Hops with white knuckles. I'm scared, Daddy. He pulled her close. I know, sweetheart, but I promise you, after tonight, things are going to be different. Better. Can you trust me? She nodded against his chest. Theodore had made his preparations carefully. The digital dead man's switch was set. If it didn't enter a code by midnight, everything would release automatically. The FBI had his evidence and was ready to move. The structural report was queued to send to the city's building department and every major media outlet in Chicago. He'd filed divorce papers that would be served tomorrow morning, along with a custody petition backed by documented evidence of the Schaefer's unfitness as grandparents. Tonight would be the end of his marriage, but the beginning of freedom for himself and Rosalie. The drive to the Schaefer estate took 40 minutes. Kathleen sat in silence, checking her phone. Rosalie held Theodore's hand in the back seat, her small fingers trembling slightly. The Schaefer mansion sprawled across 3 acres in Lake Forest, a monument to wealth and excess. Lights blazed from every window, and luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Calvin and Doris hosted Christmas dinner annually, inviting business associates, politicians, and society figures to demonstrate their power and influence. As they pulled up, Theodore spotted Calvin through the front window, holding court with Alderman Theodore recognized from the news. Doris was directing catering staff with sharp gestures. Neither had noticed their arrival yet. Theodore helped Rosalie out of the car, adjusting her coat around her shoulders. Remember, you stay close to me. If anyone says anything mean, you come find me immediately. Okay, Daddy. Kathleen was already at the door, air-kissing her mother. Doris Schaefer wore a designer red dress and enough jewelry to fund a small country. Her eyes swept over Theodore with barely concealed disdain before landing on Rosalie. Kathleen, darling, you look lovely. Theodore, a curt nod. And Rosalie, is that a stuffed animal? This is Mr. Hops, Rosalie said quietly. How juvenile. Well, I suppose we'll have to make do. Do try to keep her quiet, Theodore. We have important guests tonight. Inside, the mansion was decorated like a Christmas catalog had exploded. Towering tree, elaborate garlands, enough gold and crystal to stock a museum. Waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Politicians, business executives, and society figures mingled, their laughter sharp-edged and performative. Calvin spotted them and approached, his smile not reaching his eyes. Theodore, Kathleen, and little Rosalie. He patted the girl's head like she was a dog. Try not to break anything tonight, sweetheart. Everything here is very expensive. Rosalie shrank against Theodore's leg. The evening crawled forward with excruciating slowness. Theodore navigated conversations with people who either didn't know about the corruption at Schaefer Development or didn't care. He watched Calvin work the room, making promises and deals, his charm a weapon he wielded expertly. Doris held court near the tree, accepting compliments on her decorations while subtly belittling everyone from the caterer to her own daughter. Kathleen had abandoned Theodore within minutes, joining her mother's circle. She hadn't looked at Rosalie once. Around 8 o'clock, dinner was announced. The dining room could seat 30, and tonight it was full. Theodore found himself relegated to the far end of the table with Rosalie, far from Calvin's position at the head. It was a deliberate slight, and everyone knew it. The meal was extravagant, course after course of expensive food that Rosalie couldn't eat because of her sensory issues. Theodore quietly ordered her plain pasta from the kitchen, earning a glare from Doris. "Really, Theodore," she announced loudly enough for half the table to hear, "you coddle that child far too much. In my day, children ate what they were given or went hungry. Rosalie has specific needs, Doris. Rosalie has a father who doesn't discipline her properly." She turned to the woman beside her, stage whispering, "He comes from such a humble background, you know. Single mother, very working class. He simply doesn't understand how to raise a child properly." Theodore felt Rosalie's hand grip his under the table. He squeezed back, keeping his expression neutral. The evening continued its descent. Calvin made a toast about family, tradition, and the Schaefer legacy, staring directly at Theodore when he mentioned those who understand what real success requires. Business associates laughed at jokes Theodore didn't find funny. Kathleen drank too much wine and became louder, more animated, but never once looked his direction. By 9:30, Rosalie was exhausted and overwhelmed. The noise, the lights, the constant subtle cruelty, it was taking its toll. "Daddy, can we go home?" she whispered. "Soon, sweetheart." But Doris had heard. "Oh, is the little princess tired?" Perhaps if she went to bed at a reasonable hour like normal children instead of being allowed to stay up drawing her little pictures. "She's 7 years old," Theodore said quietly, "and she's been very patient tonight." Patient? Doris's laugh was like breaking glass. "She's been a burden, Theodore. As usual. Sitting there with that ridiculous stuffed animal, too precious to eat proper food. Honestly, I don't know what Kathleen was thinking, having a child with you. The genetic lottery clearly didn't favor the poor thing." The table went quiet. Even for Doris, this was crossing a line. Theodore stood slowly, his hand still holding Rosalie's. "We're leaving." "Oh, sit down, Theodore," Calvin barked from the head of the table. "Stop being so sensitive. Mother's just had a bit too much wine." "I'm perfectly sober," Doris snapped. "And I'm tired of pretending. This marriage was a mistake from the beginning. Theodore, you serve your purpose. Your name is on Schaefer Tower, which is all we needed. But frankly, watching you parade around here with your sanctimonious attitude and your difficult daughter is exhausting." Kathleen was staring at her wine glass, her face flushed. She said nothing. "Kathleen," Theodore's voice was steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Are you going to say something?" His wife finally looked up, but her eyes were empty. "Mother has a point, Theodore. You have been difficult lately. All those complaints about the construction, the paranoia about violations. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing." Theodore repeated the word like it was foreign. "Our daughter is being insulted, and you find me embarrassing." "Well, if the shoe fits," Doris interjected. She was enjoying this, he realized. She'd been building to this moment all night. "Honestly, Theodore, you should be grateful we've tolerated you this long. A man from your background, marrying into this family? You won the lottery. And instead of showing appropriate gratitude, you've been nothing but trouble." Calvin leaned back in his chair, swirling his scotch. "Here's the reality, son. You're a good architect, I'll give you that. But you don't understand business. You don't understand how things work. All your whining about materials and specifications, it's tiresome. We kept you around because your name legitimizes the project. But Schaefer Tower is built now. It's done. We don't need your approval or your input anymore." Theodore looked at Rosalie. Tears were streaming down her face, silent and devastating. She was shaking. Something crystallized in that moment. All the planning, all the preparation, this was the moment it had been for. He picked up Rosalie, settling her on his hip, even though she was getting too big for it. She buried her face in his shoulder. "Get out," Doris said, her voice rising. "Get out and take your brat with you." The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Some guests looked away. Others watched with the fascination of people witnessing a car crash. Theodore looked at Kathleen one last time. His wife sat frozen, saying nothing, her silence the final betrayal. Calvin stood, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. He grabbed his coffee cup and hurled the contents at Theodore's face. The hot liquid splashed across his cheek and jaw, dripping onto his shirt. Rosalie screamed. Theodore stood absolutely still, coffee dripping from his chin. He looked at Calvin, at Doris, at Kathleen. Then he adjusted his grip on Rosalie, grabbed his coat from the chair, and walked toward the door. "That's right. Run along," Doris called after him. "Back to whatever hovel your mother raised you in." Theodore paused at the doorway, turning back to face the room. Every eye was on him. The guests, the family, the waitstaff, everyone frozen in the tableau of his humiliation. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried through the sudden silence. "You'll regret this by midnight." Doris laughed, a sound like shattering crystal. "Is that a threat, Theodore? How dramatic." Calvin raised his glass in mock salute. "Midnight. I'll be sure to wait up." The table erupted in laughter, nervous, cruel, encouraged by the alcohol and the spectacle. Theodore carried Rosalie out into the cold December night, the laughter following them like smoke. He settled her into the car, buckled her seatbelt, and gently wiped the tears from her face. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she sobbed. "I'm sorry I made them mad. You did nothing wrong, sweetheart. Nothing. Do you understand me? This isn't your fault." He pulled out his phone, checking the time, 9:47 p.m. 2 hours and 13 minutes until midnight. 2 hours until the Schaefer's world ended. Theodore pulled away from the mansion, watching it disappear in the rearview mirror. In the distance, the Chicago skyline glowed against the dark sky. Schaefer Tower rose above the other buildings, its lights blazing. Not for long. He drove toward the city, toward the small apartment he'd secretly rented 3 months ago. Rosalie fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the emotional ordeal. Theodore's jaw was tight, his hands steady on the wheel. At 10:15 p.m., his phone buzzed with the first confirmation. The FBI team was in position. At 10:30, the second message arrived. The media package had been received by the Chicago Tribune, Sun-Times, and 3 television stations. At 10:45, the structural report hit the city's emergency building department inbox. Theodore parked in the underground garage of his safe haven, a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a building he designed 4 years ago, before he'd met the Schaefers. The doorman, an older man named Bernard Everett, nodded in recognition. "Evening, Mr. McDowell. Everything ready upstairs." "Thank you, Bernard." He carried Rosalie up to the apartment. It was furnished simply but comfortably, a sofa, a television, a kitchen stocked with her favorite foods. Her new bedroom had pale blue walls and shelves waiting for her books and toys. A fresh start. Theodore laid her on the sofa, covering her with a soft blanket. Then he poured himself a glass of water and sat down to wait. His phone sat on the coffee table, silent. At 11:15 p.m., it buzzed. A news alert. Breaking. Schaefer Tower under federal investigation. The Tribune had moved faster than he'd expected. At 11:23, another alert. Chicago Building Department orders immediate evacuation of Schaefer Tower. Structural integrity questioned. At 11:35, his phone started ringing. The screen displayed Kathleen Mobile. Theodore let it ring. And ring. And ring. It went to voicemail. Immediately, she called again. He didn't answer. At 11:41, Calvin's name appeared on the screen. Theodore set the phone face down on the table. More calls came. Kathleen, Calvin, Doris. Over and over. His voicemail filled with increasingly frantic messages. "Theodore, what did you do?" Kathleen's voice, high and panicked. "We need to talk, son. Call me back immediately." Calvin, trying to maintain authority. "Pick up the phone, you ungrateful." Doris, descending into profanity. At 11:47 p.m., all 3 were calling simultaneously. Theodore's phone vibrated continuously on the table, a symphony of desperate panic. He checked the news on his laptop. The story was exploding. Federal agents had arrived at the Schaefer estate. Residents and businesses in Schaefer Tower were evacuating. Over 300 people streaming out into the December night. The building department had condemned the structure, pending a complete inspection. Every major outlet was running the story, and the deeper investigations were just beginning. The FBI had enough to start unraveling the entire Schaefer empire, the bribes, the deaths, the money laundering. It would take weeks to fully unfold, but the initial charges would be filed within hours. Theodore finally picked up the phone. "Please," Kathleen sobbed. "Theodore, please. The FBI is here. They're asking about you, about the tower. Mother's hysterical. Daddy says you've destroyed everything. Please, whatever you did, you have to undo it. I can't undo the truth, Kathleen. This isn't about truth. This is about our family. Your family humiliated our daughter. Your mother called her a brat. Your father threw coffee in my face. And you sat there, silent. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Please, Theodore. They're going to arrest Daddy. They're saying people died because of the construction, that we bribed inspectors. It's all lies, and you know it. I don't know that, because it's not lies. It's documented fact. 3 people died, Kathleen. 3 workers with families. And your father paid to cover it up. Silence. Then, quietly, how long have you known? 18 months. I've been building the case since I found the first violations. You've been planning this? For 18 months, you've been pretending. I've been protecting our daughter from people who don't deserve her. I gave you chances, Kathleen. So many chances to choose us over them. You chose them. Calvin's voice erupted in the background. Give me that phone. Theodore, you son of a bitch, what have you done? I documented your crimes, Calvin. That's all. The FBI did the rest. You planted evidence. You can't do this. I'll destroy you. I'll sue you for everything you're worth. I'm worth nothing compared to what you're about to lose. And I have documentation for every single piece of evidence. Timestamps, photographs, recordings. All legally obtained. You threatened my daughter, Calvin. You thought that would make me back down. Instead, it made me meticulous. Doris was screaming in the background, incoherent with rage. The building's being evacuated, Theodore continued, his voice calm. The structural integrity is compromised exactly as I warned you. Those people could have died because of your greed. Workers did die, and you laughed at me tonight. You threw coffee in my face in front of your daughter while she cried. We'll fix this, Calvin blustered, but the panic was clear. We'll make it right. We'll rebuild to your specifications. You'll go to federal prison. Both of you. The evidence is ironclad. Kathleen grabbed the phone back. What about me, Theodore? I'm your wife. Rosalie's mother. You are my wife. Divorce papers will be served tomorrow morning. I'm filing for full custody. And given that your parents are facing federal charges and you enabled their abuse of our daughter, I expect the court will be sympathetic to my petition. You can't take her from me. You let your mother call her a brat. You sat there while your father assaulted me and traumatized your child. A judge will see the same thing I do. You chose your parents over your daughter. You don't get her anymore. Theodore, please. He ended the call. The phone immediately rang again. He powered it off. Outside the apartment windows, Chicago glowed in the night. Somewhere across the city, Schaefer Tower stood dark and empty, a monument to corruption now exposed. Federal agents were combing through Calvin's files. Journalists were breaking down the story piece by piece. Victims' families were being contacted, finally getting the justice they'd been denied. Theodore checked on Rosalie. She was still sleeping, peaceful despite the trauma of the evening. Tomorrow he'd explain what he could in terms she'd understand. They'd start therapy together, working through the damage the Schaefers had done. But tonight, she was safe. He made himself coffee, good coffee, not the pretentious, expensive blend Doris served, and sat by the window. His career would survive this. His reputation as an engineer was beyond reproach, and the evidence would show he'd been working to expose the corruption, not participate in it. The FBI had already assured him of witness protection for both him and Rosalie if needed, though Theodore didn't think it would come to that. The Schaefer's power was broken. The night stretched ahead, full of endings and beginnings. At 12:01 a.m., Theodore allowed himself a small smile. Merry Christmas. The next 3 weeks were a controlled explosion of consequences. Theodore watched from a careful distance as the Schaefer empire crumbled piece by piece. The FBI arrested Calvin on December 27th. The charges included bribery of public officials, fraud, money laundering, and criminally negligent homicide in the deaths of the 3 construction workers. Doris was arrested 2 days later on conspiracy charges. Investigators had found emails proving she'd been aware of and encouraged Calvin's corruption. Kathleen, surprisingly, wasn't charged. The prosecutors determined she'd been willfully ignorant rather than actively complicit. But ignorance came with its own consequences. Schaefer Development Corporation filed for bankruptcy protection within a week. Their business partners fled en masse. Properties were seized. The carefully constructed facade of respectability shattered, revealing decades of corruption underneath. The media coverage was relentless. The Chicago Tribune ran a multi-part investigation into the Schaefer family's business practices. Victims came forward, workers who'd been injured and paid to stay quiet, competitors who'd been intimidated, officials who'd been pressured. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Schaefer Tower became a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked greed. Structural engineers from across the country weighed in, confirming Theodore's assessment that the building was dangerously compromised. Estimates for bringing it up to code exceeded $200 million, money the bankrupt Schaefer Development didn't have. The city ultimately declared the building uninhabitable. It stood empty, a 52-story ghost in the Chicago skyline. Theodore's role in the exposure earned him a different kind of attention. The press cast him as a hero, the principled engineer who'd risked everything to expose corruption. Interview requests poured in. He declined most of them, granting only a few carefully controlled conversations that focused on the structural issues and the importance of building safety, never on his personal story. He had more important things to focus on. Rosalie thrived away from the Schaefer toxicity. The apartment became a haven where she could be herself without criticism. Theodore enrolled her in a new school with smaller class sizes and teachers trained in anxiety management. He cut his work hours, hiring an associate to handle routine projects while he focused on being present for his daughter. They established new routines, breakfast together every morning, walks along the lakefront, bedtime stories that sometimes turned into discussions about how buildings stayed standing. Rosalie started drawing again, elaborate sketches of imaginary structures that combined Theodore's engineering precision with her own wild creativity. "Daddy, if you could design anything in the whole world, what would it be?" she asked one evening while they built a blanket fort in the living room. Theodore considered the question seriously. A library. A beautiful public library where anyone could come to learn and feel safe. Big windows for natural light. Reading nooks in quiet corners. A children's section with beanbags and colorful murals. No one judging anyone for what they read or how they look. "Can we build it together? When you're older, absolutely." She grinned, a sight that had become more common over the past weeks. "I want to put a secret room in it. For kids who need to be alone when things get too loud." "That's perfect, sweetheart." The divorce proceedings were straightforward. Kathleen's attorney attempted to fight the custody arrangement, but Theodore's documentation of the Christmas incident, including testimony from several guests who'd witnessed the abuse, made her case impossible. The judge awarded Theodore full custody with restricted visitation rights for Kathleen, contingent on family therapy sessions. Kathleen showed up for exactly one session before disappearing. Theodore learned through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to California, attempting to reinvent herself away from her parents' scandal. She didn't call Rosalie. She didn't write. She simply vanished from their lives like she'd never been there at all. "Does Mommy love me?" Rosalie asked one night after a particularly good day. Theodore pulled her close. "I think your mother loves the idea of you. But loving the idea of someone and actually loving them are different things. Real love means showing up, being there when things are hard, protecting the people you care about. Your mother doesn't know how to do that. Did you love Mommy?" "I love who I thought she was." "That's different too. Do you love me? The real me? More than anything in the world. Every single part of you." She relaxed against him. "Good." Calvin and Doris's trial was scheduled for September. Theodore would be called as a witness, a prospect he didn't relish, but accepted as necessary. The prosecutors were confident in their case. Defense attorneys were already floating plea deal proposals. In February, Theodore received an unexpected visitor at his office. Miguel Calhoun, the construction foreman from Schaefer Tower, appeared nervously clutching a worn baseball cap. "Mr. McDowell? I don't know if you remember me." "Of course, Miguel. Please sit down." The man perched on the edge of the chair. "I wanted to thank you for what you did. My brother, he was one of the men who died. Luis Calhoun. They told us it was an accident, that he'd been careless. Paid us $50,000 to sign papers saying we wouldn't sue. Theodore felt something tighten in his chest. I'm sorry for your loss. He wasn't careless. I knew it, but I couldn't prove it. The safety equipment was faulty. The inspections were rushed. But they had lawyers, and we had nothing. Miguel's hands twisted the cap. When everything came out, when they started investigating, they're reopening Luis's case. The other deaths, too. The families might finally get real justice. They deserve it. Because of you, you didn't have to do this. You could have just walked away from the project, found other work. Instead, you risked everything to expose them. Miguel stood, extending his hand. You're a good man, Mr. McDowell. Thank you. After Miguel left, Theodore sat alone in his office for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences. He'd acted out of anger and a desire to protect Rosalie. The broader justice had been a byproduct, almost accidental. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the motivation mattered less than the outcome. His phone rang, his assistant letting him know his next appointment had arrived. Theodore pushed aside the heavy thoughts and focused on the present. A community center in Pilsen needed a structural assessment. The board had limited funding, but big dreams of serving their neighborhood's children. Theodore took the meeting. Pro bono. He had plenty to spare now. By April, the Chicago architecture community was buzzing about Theodore's latest project. The city had approached him to redesign a failing public library in Englewood, one of the South Side's most underserved neighborhoods. The budget was modest, the challenges significant, but Theodore had accepted immediately. He involved Rosalie in the design process, incorporating her ideas for quiet spaces and natural light. They visited the site together, talking to librarians and community members about what they needed. Rosalie sketched alongside him, her childish drawings inspiring elements of his more technical plans. The project felt redemptive in a way his corporate work never had. One evening in late April, Theodore was working late in his home office when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Theodore McDowell. Mr. McDowell, this is Jordan Holmes from the Illinois Attorney General's office. Do you have a moment? Of course. We've been reviewing the Schaefer case extensively. Your documentation has been invaluable. The structural report alone probably saved lives. We found evidence they were planning to open the building's residential floors next month despite knowing about the safety issues. Theodore felt sick. Families would have moved in. Children would have lived in that death trap. I'm calling because we'd like to discuss expanding our investigation. Holmes continued. Your work on the Schaefer case suggests a pattern that might extend beyond one family. There are other developers in Chicago, other projects where corners might have been cut. Would you be willing to consult with us? Not as an investigator, but as an expert who can identify red flags in construction practices. It was an opportunity to do more good, to prevent other tragedies, to use his knowledge for something that mattered. I need to protect my time with my daughter. She's my priority. Absolutely. This would be as needed consultation, while compensated, entirely on your schedule. Then yes, I'm interested. After the call ended, Theodore found Rosalie in the living room, building an elaborate structure with her blocks. She'd gotten more sophisticated with her designs, creating stable, elegant forms that showed real intuitive understanding of weight distribution. What are you building, sweetheart? A castle, but not a regular one. This one has a moat and a bridge, and the bridge can lift up so only the people who are nice can get in. Smart design. Daddy, are you happy now? The question caught him off guard. He sat down beside her, careful not to disturb her construction. Yes, he said after a moment. I am. Are you? She considered it with the seriousness she brought to everything. I miss having a mommy sometimes, but I like her life now. I like that you're not sad anymore. You used to be sad a lot, even when you smiled. He hadn't realized she'd noticed. You're very perceptive. That means smart about feelings, right? Exactly. She placed another block carefully on her castle's tower. Grandma Doris and Grandpa Calvin were mean to you. I'm glad we don't see them anymore. They weren't good people, Rosalie, but that doesn't mean all of Mommy's family is bad. You have Aunt Brandy in Portland, remember? She called last week. Brandy Rivers had been Kathleen's cousin, someone Theodore had only met twice during his marriage. After the scandal broke, she'd reached out privately to apologize for the family's behavior and to ask about Rosalie. The calls had continued, warm and genuine. "Aunt Brandy's nice," Rosalie agreed. "She sends funny postcards. Maybe we'll visit her this summer. See the coast. Can we look at buildings there too?" Theodore smiled. "Definitely." In June, the preliminary hearings for Calvin and Doris Schaefer began. Theodore attended, sitting in the gallery with Rosalie safely at home with a trusted sitter. He watched as the prosecution laid out the case piece by piece. The bribes, the violations, the deaths. Calvin looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, his swagger gone. Doris appeared almost fragile, her expensive clothes replaced by prison issue. They didn't look at Theodore once during the proceedings. The victims' families sat in the front rows. Miguel Calhoun was there for his brother. Two other families represented the other workers who died. Seeing them made everything real in a way the legal documents hadn't. During a recess, one of the widows approached Theodore in the hallway. She was young, mid-30s, maybe, with tired eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "You're the architect, the one who exposed them." "Yes, ma'am. My husband was Raphael Stevenson. He died 2 years ago when scaffolding collapsed. They said he wasn't wearing his safety harness properly, but Raphael was careful. He had 3 kids. He wouldn't have been careless." Theodore's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry." The new investigation found that the scaffolding didn't meet code. That inspections were falsified. Raphael died because they cut corners. She blinked back tears. "I've been so angry for 2 years. Angry at Raphael for leaving us. Angry at myself for believing their lies. Now I can be angry at the right people. They deserve all your anger and more. Thank you, Mr. McDowell, for caring enough to do something. A lot of people knew things were wrong. You're the only one who spoke up." After she walked away, Theodore stood in the courthouse hallway for a long time, watching the afternoon light filter through the tall windows. Justice was happening. Slowly, imperfectly, but happening. It wasn't enough to bring back the men who died. Nothing could do that. But it was something. The trial itself began in September, as autumn painted Chicago in golds and reds. Theodore testified for 2 days, presenting his structural analysis and documentation of the violations. Defense attorneys tried to shake him, suggesting he'd fabricated evidence out of spite over a failed marriage. "Mr. McDowell, isn't it true you had personal animosity toward the Schaefer family?" "Yes." The attorney blinked, surprised by the easy admission. "So you admit your testimony is biased?" "My feelings toward the Schaefers are irrelevant to the structural integrity of their building. Physics doesn't care about personal grudges. The evidence speaks for itself." He presented calculations, photographs, engineering standards. The prosecution brought in 3 independent structural engineers who confirmed every one of Theodore's findings. The defense had nothing substantive to counter with. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Calvin Schaefer was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Doris received 12 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution to the victims' families, though the amounts would likely never be fully collected from their depleted assets. Theodore didn't attend the sentencing. He'd said his piece. The verdict was enough. Instead, he spent that day at the Englewood Library site with Rosalie, watching the construction crew break ground on the redesign. His daughter wore a little hard hat the foreman had given her, chattering excitedly about where the children's section would be. "This is going to be so cool, Daddy. Kids are going to love coming here." "That's the goal, sweetheart." Theodore's phone buzzed with news alerts about the sentencing, but he didn't check them. The chapter was closed. The Schaefers would spend years in prison, their empire demolished, their reputation destroyed. It was over. That evening, back at the apartment, Theodore made Rosalie's favorite dinner, spaghetti with marinara sauce and garlic bread. They ate on the floor while watching a documentary about bridges. Normal. Peaceful. After Rosalie went to bed, Theodore stood by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Schaefer Tower's dark silhouette was still visible, a reminder of everything that had happened. The city was considering several proposals for the building: demolition, extensive renovation, conversion to a memorial for construction workers. Whatever happened to the structure, Theodore's role in its story was finished. He thought about that Christmas night, carrying Rosalie out of the Schaefer mansion with coffee dripping from his face. The humiliation had felt so complete, so crushing. Doris's laughter still echoed in his memory sometimes. But she wasn't laughing now. None of them were. Theodore had been meticulous in his revenge, patient in his planning. He'd given the Schaefers every chance to choose differently, to be better people. They'd chosen cruelty instead. The consequences were theirs to bear. He checked on Rosalie one last time before heading to bed himself. She was sleeping peacefully, Mr. Hops tucked under one arm. No nightmares, no anxiety, just a little girl safe in her home. That was the real victory, not the convictions or the justice or the public vindication. This, his daughter sleeping soundly, free from people who'd never valued her. A future full of possibilities instead of toxicity. Theodore turned off the lights and went to sleep. Tomorrow, there was a library to build. 18 months after that Christmas night, Theodore McDowell stood in the completed Englewood Library, watching children stream through the doors. The building was everything he'd envisioned, warm, welcoming, filled with natural light and quiet spaces. Rosalie's idea for a sensory-friendly room had been implemented beautifully, a small haven where kids could retreat when the world got too loud. His daughter stood beside him, taller now at 9 years old, prouder. "We did good, Daddy. We did excellent, sweetheart." The library director, an energetic woman named Leanne Charles, approached with a genuine smile. "Mr. McDowell, this is incredible. We've already had 300 visitors today, and we've only been open 2 hours. The neighborhood has been waiting for something like this. I'm just glad I could help." "You did more than help. You gave us something extraordinary on a budget that should have limited us to basic renovations. However you managed it, thank you." After she walked away, Rosalie tugged Theodore's sleeve. "Aunt Brandy's here." Brandy Rivers had flown in from Portland for the library's opening. She'd become a consistent presence in their lives over the past 18 months. Phone calls, visits, a relationship that had nothing to do with the Schaefers and everything to do with genuine affection for Rosalie. "Look at this place." Brandy swept Rosalie into a hug before turning to Theodore. "You really did something special here. Community deserved it." They toured the library together, Rosalie pointing out her favorite features. The quiet room with its soft lighting and comfortable cushions. The children's section with murals depicting Chicago landmarks. The teen space with modern furniture and charging stations. The community meeting rooms available for free to neighborhood groups. It was architecture with purpose, design that served people instead of egos. This was what Theodore had always wanted to build. Later, after the opening celebration wound down, Theodore and Rosalie walked along the lakefront. The Chicago summer evening was perfect. Warm breeze, golden light, the city skyline reflected in the water. "Daddy, what happened to Schaefer Tower? I saw it's not there anymore." Theodore had wondered when she'd notice. "They demolished it last month. The building couldn't be saved." "Because Grandpa Calvin cut corners?" "Yes." "Good," she said simply. "It was bad. It should be gone." She wasn't wrong. The demolition had taken weeks, the tower coming down piece by piece. Some people had protested. The building had been architecturally striking despite its flaws. But the city had decided the reminder of corruption wasn't worth preserving. The empty lot was being purchased by a coalition of affordable housing developers. Theodore had been asked to consult on the new project, residential units for working families, built to the highest standards of safety and sustainability. Full circle. "Do you ever think about Mommy?" Rosalie asked suddenly. They'd reached a bench overlooking the water. Theodore sat down, and his daughter settled beside him. "Sometimes. Do you?" "A little. I saw her on TV last week. She was at some party in California." Theodore had seen the same coverage. Kathleen had reinvented herself as a socialite in Los Angeles, dating a tech executive, pretending Chicago had never happened. She looked happy in the photos, or at least she looked like someone trying very hard to appear happy. "Does it bother you?" he asked gently. Rosalie considered it. "Kind of, but also not really. Like, I'm sad she doesn't want to know me. but I'm not sad she's not around. That probably sounds mean. It sounds honest. Your feelings are allowed to be complicated. Aunt Brandy says Mommy has always been good at running away from hard things. Aunt Brandy's very wise. They sat in comfortable silence, watching boats drift across the lake. Theodore thought about the past 2 years, the destruction of one life, the construction of another, the pain and the healing, the endings and beginnings. Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be an architect like you, but I want to build things that help people. Like the library. You can build whatever you want, sweetheart. Whatever matters to you. Will you teach me? Every single thing I know. She leaned against him, content. Theodore wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding his daughter close while the sun set over Chicago. The Schaeffers were in prison. Kathleen was in California. Schaeffer Tower was rubble. But Theodore and Rosalie were here, together, building a future one honest structure at a time. The revenge had been satisfying. The justice had been necessary. But this quiet moment of peace with his daughter, this was the real victory. Everything else had just been clearing the way for it. As they walked back toward home, Rosalie chattering about designs for an impossible treehouse, Theodore allowed himself a moment of gratitude for his daughter's resilience, for the chance to start over, for the strength to have stood up when it mattered most. That Christmas night felt like a lifetime ago. The man who'd walked out of the Schaeffer mansion carrying his crying daughter had been broken in ways he hadn't fully understood. The man walking along the lakefront now was whole, not despite what he'd done, but because of it. Sometimes justice required patience. Sometimes it required planning. Sometimes it required the willingness to burn down everything familiar to protect what truly mattered. Theodore had done all three, and he'd do it again without hesitation, because some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth protecting, and some victories were measured not in courtroom verdicts or demolished towers, but in the sound of a little girl's laughter as she described impossible architecture under a summer sky. That was enough. That was everything. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.